Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Simon from Scar Illustration, and I hope you're keeping well. Today I'm going to talk about how to paint smoke in a realistic way. Let's dive in. When I was creating this painting, I needed to learn how to paint smoke convincingly. I'd painted smoke before, of course, but I was never really that happy with the way it looked. Somehow I wasn't really buying the end results. So I hopped onto YouTube and started looking for tutorials. And surprisingly, there weren't that many. The ones that I did find weren't really all that informative, or they were just too basic and not realistic enough for what I was after. Undeterred, I went and had a look at how some other artists that I admire had painted smoke, and I spent some time studying those paintings. I then gathered some reference on smoke and put together a photo montage that I could use as a basis for the smoke in my painting. I added a layer with a flat color above my painting so that I could clearly see what I was doing without having the underlying painting getting in the way. After that, I sketched out how I wanted the smoke to look, which was based on the reference photos. For the sketch, I opted to use an actual color, as opposed to just black or gray, so as to make it a bit easier to see the sketch when painting. Once the sketch was done, it was time to start the base layer. As this is a fantasy painting, the smoke needed to look magical, which is why I started with a blue color. Using a soft airbrush, I started to carefully paint in the overall shape of the smoke, adding more paint to certain areas than others, and ignoring other areas completely. To emulate the translucency of this smoke, as the sketch is somewhat complicated, I was spending more time looking at the reference than my painting. I think this is crucial when trying to emulate anything, and a mistake that I used to make when I was starting out. Back in the day, I would have the reference in front of me, but would prefer to just look at it sparingly, and I would end up with less than optimal results, and some of that looked ultimately unbelievable. I also think this applies to all styles of painting, not just representational art. Because even if you're doing something more stylized, or even impressionistic, you'll still need to have as much information as possible, so you know what to keep and what to leave out. As I'm going through this stage of the painting, I make sure to turn off the sketch layer every now and then, and zoom out to see how things are progressing, and to make sure that it's heading in the direction that I want. Once the base layer was kind of done, it was time to start adding the more definition to the smoke. For this, I turned off the base layer so I could see the sketch easier, added a new layer, and selected a much smaller brush. And after studying the reference, I started applying paint. For the most part, I was following the sketch lines, but there were some areas where I needed to really study the reference, so as to get the brush strokes in all the right places. Once these brush strokes were in place, I turned the base layer back on, and started to accentuate different areas, as well as knocking back other parts, whilst paying close attention to the reference. I made sure not to rush during this stage, so that I wouldn't miss anything. I was also moving from the definition layer to the base layer constantly, as I was developing the smoke. Once that stage was complete, I removed the flat color layer to see how the smoke was fitting in with the rest of the painting. I then turned off those layers and added another one underneath, as I wanted to add a soft blue cloud effect to the smoke. Zooming out to check how it was all looking at regular intervals. For this, I opted to use the cloud brush, because I wanted the mark making to be a bit more random. I know that some artists are against using brushes such as this, And while I agree that using a texture brush is no substitute for understanding what you're painting, I also think that for some things, these types of brushes are ideal. If this was a traditional painting, I'd be using different brushes and techniques to get the effects that I needed. And I see this as no different. Once the basic shape was completed, I made a quick mask and went back in with a soft airbrush to break up the shape for more visual interest and to get away from the repetitiveness of the cloud brush. As the overall shape wasn't quite fitting with the other layers, I used the Warp Transform tool to make the changes that were needed, and then went on to add some more subtle smoke wisps to the bottom of the painting. So to sum up, I would say that in order to paint smoke convincingly, I used a layer with a more subtle cloud which adds more opaqueness to the smoke overall. On top of that, a layer which has the soft wisps of smoke for the general shape, and a final layer with the smaller brush strokes, which is more opaque, to emphasize the definition of the smoke. If you found this video helpful, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more tips on improving your art. Thanks for watching, and keep on painting.